Doors glide open beside the Giza pyramids. Glass flares, drums surge. A 3,200-year-old Ramses II fills the frame. The camera drifts past immaculate vitrines, yet the world's most famous Egyptian treasures are missing. Welcome to the Grand Egyptian Museum. Decades delayed, billions invested, a 21st century temple to 5 millennia. Cedar boat timbers, linen wrappings, faience blues and gold leaf on carved wood, inked papyri, copper chisels under museum light. A modern engine for ancient memory, and still the shadows speak. Because some icons live elsewhere. The Rosetta Stone in London, Nefertiti in Berlin, the Dendera Zodiac and a Luxor Obelisk in Paris. A marvel here, yet a reminder of journeys still unfinished. Today we'll trace how those icons left, why some may never return, and how the Grand Egyptian Museum is rewriting ownership, pride and power through law, diplomacy, and the grammar of display. We open that question now and close the loop at the end. This is Armchair Archaeology. Clean stories, sharp stakes, zero jargon. We dig ancient worlds with modern eyes. Stay to the end for a twist about Egypt's most famous missing stone, one that flips the repatriation debate on its head.
The Grand Egyptian Museum doesn't whisper its ambitions, it stages them. You step into a geometry of glass and desert light, and there he stands, Ramses II, a granite sovereign finally indoors after 3 millennia of sun. His skin is weather-burnished, the gaze resolute, proof that monuments were engineered to outstare time. Beyond him, the galleries unspool like a ceremonial route. Khufu's solar boat, a cedar ribcage re-knit into a vessel meant to ride with Ra. Tutankhamun's world arranged as a life told in objects. Gold leaf clinging to carved wood, faience blues like fallen sky, reed arrows, sandals with creases that remember a human stride. What arrests you isn't just splendor, it's the machinery beneath it. The solar boat didn't simply arrive. It moved at night inside a climate-controlled shell, its route plotted to keep vibrations below a hair's breadth. An ancient ship surfing a wave of nitrogen and math. And Ramses, 80 tons, threaded through Cairo traffic like a stone comet, rehearsed to seconds, turns measured, cables tuned by engineers with the nerves of surgeons. Conservation here reads like precision engineering. The building is the instrument, which means the building isn't merely a container. It's an argument cast in concrete and lines of force. Egypt can safeguard its past and tell it with authority. Labels read like complete thoughts. Lighting draws out chisel chatter and pigment ghosts. And the route has edits and reveals, cutaways and close-ups that carry you forward. Artifacts long scattered sit in conversation again, their meanings thickening in context. In short, the museum isn't just display. It's Egypt proving it can safeguard and interpret its own past at world-class standards. And then, the eye catches something else. Spaces that feel expectant, pedestals with a hint of pause. Triumph fills the atrium, and echo moves between the cases. Even in a temple of returns, absence is part of the design. An invitation to ask who isn't in frame yet, and why. If stories like this change how you see the past, you'll fit right in here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next dig.
Walk the Grand Egyptian Museum long enough, and the missing begin to feel like presences. Named, storied, almost audible. One speaks in 3 voices at once: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, pressed into a single dark surface found in a Nile Delta fort and surrendered after a war. The Rosetta Stone's power isn't the proclamation so much as the repetition.
parallel lines that finally make the language sing. In London, it draws crowds. In Giza, its absence reads like a footnote that keeps rewriting the page. Another smiles with improbable composure. Nefertiti's profile in Berlin is all calm geometry and skin tone pigment, the kind of realism that makes time look short. Stand close and you notice the breath that never finished, one eye bright, the other uncarved, a studio pause that somehow outlived empires. Paperwork once called it a fair division under partage, the era's split the fines rule. Today, it feels like a line drawn with a very steady colonial hand. Overhead, a sky carved in stone once told priests when to act. The Dendera Zodiac, lifted from a temple ceiling and shipped to Paris, looks pharaonic until you trace the planets and meet a more cosmopolitan cosmos, a Greco-Roman astronomy speaking in Egyptian iconography, proof that Egyptian time braided with newer clocks. Back at Dendera, a replica peers up at the same stars. And in a Paris roundabout, granite points at weather. The Luxor Obelisk stands amid traffic, its base etched with 19th century engineering diagrams, its pyramidion not ancient at all, but a modern gilded cap, an old needle wearing a new hat. Its twin still anchors Luxor Temple Court, the pair split by diplomacy that reads differently depending on where you stand. Each of these lives elsewhere, yet they haunt these galleries like negative space. They left through conquest, contract, convenience, and consent complicated by power. Seen from the Grand Egyptian Museum, they aren't simply gone. They hover in the frames of empty pedestals, shaping the story precisely by not being here.
Rewind to an age when archaeology wore a cavalry coat. Soldiers bivouacked beside columns, surveyors sketched sphinxes between skirmishes. Napoleon's savants mapped, measured, and published a paper empire, Description de l'Égypte, turning temples into plates and plates into prestige. When the French lost at Alexandria, crates changed hands by claws, antiquities listed like artillery in a surrender document. The stones did not sprint away in the night, they queued through customs on the strength of victory stamps. Objects traveled on paperwork the way people cross borders: permits, timing, signatures. Administration soon replaced gunpowder. Under Ottoman authority, local governors issued firmans, official decrees that functioned like export permits, polite letters that opened storerooms. A signature in Ottoman Turkish could lift a statue from sand to ship. Later, the partage system codified the split, finders and host country dividing discoveries like harvest, overseen by inspectors who decided what counted as duplicate or surplus. A sarcophagus might be tagged for Cairo, a limestone relief, deemed redundant, sailed for Europe wrapped in newspaper. The quiet shock is how ordinary it looks on paper. Receipts and seals and inventories, empire rendered as filing. Techniques made removal look inevitable. Engineers levered colossi with palm fiber ropes and grease. Ceilings were sawn into transportable slabs. Inscriptions lifted as squeezes that pulled pigment with the paper. The Nile became a conveyor belt. Feluccas to steamers to ocean liners, artifacts moving from river to gallery with the same crisp efficiency as mail. Egypt did push back. The Antiquity Service grew teeth, banning exports of unique objects, slowing the outflow, insisting on context before crates. Yet exceptions and temporary loans proliferated where influence outweighed policy. A museum director's cordial letter could soften a rule. A donor's check could open a back door. Seen from the Grand Egyptian Museum's bright halls, the past's departures aren't a chase scene, but a queue at the counter. Permits and packing lists smoothing rough power. That is the unsettling lesson. Much of what left did so under the cover of order,
not chaos, carrying the dignity of a stamp that outlasted the sand on the artifact's shoes. Even the scribes who logged those firmans needed a steady hand and a sturdy cup. This one, our Ancient Secrets mug, is etched with the same calm geometry that shaped those ledgers of empire. Links in the pinned comment.
Some objects don't sit in cases. They set the terms of the room. In London, a dark granodiorite slab reads like a verdict, one decree in 3 scripts, carved in 196 BCE and rediscovered in 1799 by soldiers shoring up a Nile Delta fort. When flags changed, paperwork followed. A treaty clause shifting the stone from a French crate to a British gallery. What mattered wasn't the royal tax break it proclaims, but the repetition. Greek, Demotic, the everyday script, and hieroglyphs aligned like parallel tracks. Scholars took paper impressions, squeezes. Inked copies sped across Europe. Thomas Young traced sound values, and Champollion finally scribbled that he had it after years of comparison. The Rosetta Stone didn't just travel, it turned every Egyptian inscription into a readable voice. Up the continent, another presence rules by silence. In 1912, a German team at Amarna lifted a painted limestone bust from a sculpture studio, a queen whose profile edits the air. The records call it partage, the era's split the fines rule between Egypt and excavators. Berlin built an entire mood around her. Muted walls, careful light, a hush that feels ceremonial. Step close, and perfection tips into intimacy. One inlaid eye gleaming, the other socket bare, a moment mid-process that somehow outlived empires. Early descriptions may have understated her significance, an administrative shrug with century-long consequences. Both pieces became citizens of their host cities. The Rosetta Stone is a cornerstone of the British Museum's identity. Nefertiti is the newest museum's heartbeat. Posters, guidebooks, even civic branding borrow their silhouettes, and their absence in Giza reads like a sentence missing its subject. Requests for return rarely hinge on a single rule. Conservation standards, public access, donor politics, and the self-image of entire institutions weigh the scale. Inside the Grand Egyptian Museum, those dynamics turn tangible. Sightlines seem to wait for certain silhouettes. Labels gesture to stories that continue off-site. Presence is powerful, and so is the shape of what isn't there. If you stood in that gallery, would you see these artifacts as ambassadors or as exiles? I'd love to hear how you'd read the silence.
The 20th century wrote the exit routes. The 21st began mapping returns. Egypt's tone shifted from pleading to prosecuting. Press conferences, dossiers, and a small army of lawyers and scholars who treat provenance like a crime scene. Names you've heard, Zahi Hawass among them, made headlines. But the quiet grind happens in archives and customs databases, where a shipping label can undo a century of certainty. Ministries file claims through UNESCO channels, embassies lobby, and museum boards learn a new word: due diligence. Sometimes the reckoning feels theatrical. A gilded coffin, bought by a major museum on the strength of stamped papers, had barely finished its blockbuster tour before investigators noticed the ink on its passport was newer than its mummy, provenance forged after a 2011 theft. The institution staged a public reversal, apologizing as the coffin traveled home under escort. In another case, a painted sarcophagus that toured American galleries crossed back to Cairo after prosecutors traced its trail through a web of dealers. Seizures at airports, raids on private collections, even a scandal that brushed a European museum's own curators, each one tightened the net. Egypt's case is simple and layered. Context matters, law has a memory, and pride may not be a legal claim, but it is a human one. Officials point to the Grand Egyptian Museum and a revitalized network in Luxor and Fustat as proof of capacity. Climate control and conservation labs, big audiences and trained hands. The message lands differently when an atrium can cradle an 80-ton colossus and a 4,000-year-old boat without a shiver. Diplomats talk loans, scholars draft joint research, and a new phrase creeps into communiques: shared stewardship. Not every demand yields a crate with a custom seal. Yet the calculus has changed. Insurance companies, donors, and trustees now ask what once went unasked. The way studios scrutinize licensing before a show streams worldwide. And in Giza, you feel the pressure in the architecture. View corridors that seem to invite particular silhouettes, plinths that look like open quotation marks. The museum doesn't threaten, it demonstrates. By doing so, it makes return feel less like loss and more like a story coming back into its native grammar.
Step across the negotiating line, and the picture reframes. European museums argue they aren't warehouses of conquest, but vaults of continuity. Institutions built to stabilize fragile things against war, weather, and fashion. Conservation becomes a language of microclimates and lux levels, light intensity set with decimal care. Contracts read like engineering, humidity specified down to a percent. The pitch is simple. Keep masterpieces where the audience is largest, the labs are deep, and the politics are less volatile. One gallery can host more schoolchildren in a week than some sites see in a season. One restoration can halt a pigment's slow fade that began before Rome was born. History supplies their case law. When bombs fell in 1940, London's curators didn't just lock doors, they moved stones into the underground, tucking antiquity behind tiled platforms while the city burned above. Collections survived because buildings breathed for them, basements and bunkers and purpose-built vaults, an institutional reflex to shield objects when nations convulse. From this vantage, the Universal Museum reads like continuity insurance. Keep culture online when governments go offline. There's also the argument of reach. A traveler who may never stand in Giza can meet Egypt in Paris or Berlin. A refugee can trace a homeland through a display case continents away. Labels multiply languages, research crosses oceans, replicas return know-how as much as lookalikes. Directors describe stewardship as a chain, not a handoff, loans that rotate, partnerships that tie conservators and archaeologists together, exhibitions that braid stories rather than trade trophies. None of this erases asymmetry. Insurance requirements, donor covenants, and national laws harden positions. An indefinite loan can sound like forever written in careful clauses. Yet, even inside these bastions, the ground shifts. Provenance teams grow, returns happen, wall texts change tone. To the visitor, it's a clean room of light and marble. To the institutions, it's a balancing act. Protect, present, and persuade, while knowing the same spotlight that illuminates an artifact also throws a long shadow back toward where it came from. Museums tell stories. This one also sets the agenda. The Grand Egyptian Museum sits within sight of the pyramids by design, not convenience. Architecture as a lens that gathers antiquity and the modern state into the same frame. Step into the atrium and you see why. A wall of glass pulls the plateau indoors, so Ramses II seems to share a room with Khufu's geometry. Photographers wait for dusk,
when the pyramids turn to charcoal silhouettes and the galleries glow like embers. The image travels faster than any press release, not just good optics, but foreign policy in wide shot. Placement radiates strategy. Visitors can land at Cairo's airport, follow a new spine of highways, and pass from security checkpoint to ticket gate without wading through downtime chaos. Tour buses, hotel clusters, and conference halls orbit the museum like satellites, each one converting narrative into revenue, and revenue into cultural leverage. A head of state who steps to a podium here doesn't need a flag. 3 stone triangles appear over the shoulder and do the work of an anthem. Inside, the pacing tightens. The grand staircase rises between colossi and fractured reliefs. As you climb, shards give way to faces, then to whole figures, until the gallery reads like a voice clearing its throat. Landings catch the plateau at precise angles, a turn of the head pulling the pyramids into the frame, the light slipping from cool glass to a warmer, stone-lit hush. Wayfinding nudges you toward these reveals, while the open plazas outside are scaled for ceremonies that feel time-deep even when the words are new. By the upper terraces, the architecture is doing what an edit does, setting beats, withholding and releasing. So archaeology and nationhood don't alternate, they harmonize in the same shot. There is a quiet calculus beneath the spectacle. The closer you situate artifacts to their landscape, the stronger your claim to steward them, and the more persuasive your invitations for loans and returns. A museum beside the pyramids can say with a straight face that context isn't a slogan, it's the view. The pressure beamed abroad is steady. Call these objects World Heritage if you like, the world can visit them on Egypt's terms. In stone and sightline, the message is clear. This story has come home, and home is now a global address.
Not everything was summoned to the shadow of the pyramids. Egypt let certain voices stay rooted. So the story isn't just centralized, it's textured. In Luxor, Tutankhamun's mummy rests within steps of the chamber where Carter first peered in. The body held in a climate-controlled case that breathes with the desert. Visitors hear the valley's hush, then meet the boy king not as a blockbuster, but as a person returned to his room. The decision is part science, mummies hate travel, and part philosophy. Context isn't an exhibit feature, it's a promise. Cairo tells a parallel tale. While the Grand Egyptian Museum gathers pharaonic splendor at Giza, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization and Fustat curates the long arc, from stone tools to Coptic textiles to Islamic woodwork, so the past reads as continuity, not silo. That institution became a household name during a night that felt half pageant, half logistics dissertation, the Pharaohs' Golden Parade. 22 royal mummies crossed the city in nitrogen-cushioned carriages at walking speed, each vehicle tuned to its occupants' dimensions, each route mapped for vibration. The spectacle drew cameras. The engineering carried the weight. Beyond the capitals, regional museums have kept anchors in place. In Sohag, in Alexandria, in Aswan, galleries lean into local finds and local pride, turning heritage into hometown economies rather than draining it toward one megaplex. A statue uncovered near Komombo can greet school children who share its sun. Ceramics from provincial cemeteries sit a short drive from the fields that supplied them millennia ago. Walk the Grand Egyptian Museum and you feel the magnetism of scale. Step into Luxor's dust, Fustad's lakeside hall, or a provincial gallery, and you sense the strategy. A constellation, not a single star. It is a portfolio approach to memory. Don't stack the entire past in one basket. Egypt is staking a claim that stewardship is more than custody of objects. It is keeping their meanings close to the landscapes that made them.
Loans don't move on applause. They move on paperwork, insurance, and nerves. A masterpiece leaving its case travels like a head of state. Condition reports thick as novels. GPS beacons in the crate. Shock loggers set to blink if a pothole gets personal. Convoys add decoy trucks. Couriers ride along counting minutes, humidity, and breaths. The plan holds until it doesn't, and that is where reputations harden into policy. Museums remember nights when alarms didn't matter. During periods of unrest, display cases can turn to glass confetti, objects scattered in rooms that feel suddenly too large. Curators spend dawn on their knees, matching fragments to fingers and gilding to wood. Archaeologists in their own galleries. Elsewhere, war turned the desert into a marketplace. Smashed reliefs and looted figurines slipped into private catalogs under invented backstories. And in one of the world's most prestigious institutions, an internal theft scandal showed that risk isn't always a masked intruder. It can wear a staff badge. Trustees read the headlines, and loan agreements quietly grow teeth. The dilemmas multiply beyond locks and lasers. Insurers refuse certain routes during conflict. Sanctions can freeze a crate in warehouse limbo. A single delayed flight can unravel a timetable built over years. Climate activists turned galleries into stages, splashing attention onto art under glass, harmless to the objects, not to anxiety. A museum accepts or declines alone not only on ethics, but on logistics. Does the destination have redundant climate systems with automatic failover, independent audits, enough trained hands to move a sarcophagus without improvisation? Egypt sits in this tangle with a double identity, lender and claimant. The Grand Egyptian Museum, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, and regional hubs advertise competence in steel and protocol, a counterargument to lingering doubt. Yet some partners hesitate to send icons back on temporary terms, worried that temporary can stretch, or that a coup, a court case, or a customs strike will steal a week the object cannot afford. So trust becomes the rarest artifact in the room, renewed with every safe arrival, cracked with every scandal, repaired in the careful language of memoranda. That sets the stage for a different kind of solution, one that treats belonging as more than a shipping address.
What if home isn't a single room, but a circuit? Repatriation can feel like a verdict, win or lose, here or there. Yet the future of heritage may read more like a schedule than a sentence. Imagine marquee pieces on rotating seasons. Years in Giza, framed by the plateau's horizon line, followed by carefully timed residencies abroad that export context as well as charisma. Contracts fix the rhythm, conservation checkups on the calendar, research time guaranteed on both ends. So movement turns into maintenance rather than risk, more like licensing a hit show than shipping a trophy. Co-curation pushes the idea further. Exhibitions built by teams split across Cairo, Luxor, Berlin, Paris, and London don't just share objects, they share authorship. Wall texts change because the chorus writing them changes. A label drafted in Arabic and English, then revised in German or French, folds multiple vantage points into the same sentence. Ownership turning into voice rather than volume. High-fidelity replicas once felt like compromise. Now they do what originals can't. Ultra-precise scans catch chisel chatter and faint pigment, and 3D prints let visitors handle forms that would shatter under a curious fingertip. In one gallery, a relief can be read in raking light while the master sleeps. In another, a tactile twin teaches by touch, opening ancient craft to people who learn with their hands. The copy is not a lie. It is a lens. Digital access widens the room. Open imaging, photogrammetry,
and CT datasets, let conservators in Cairo troubleshoot with colleagues in Boston at 2 in the morning, while students in Aswan or Sheffield zoom into a cartouche grain by grain. Provenance trails, once locked in filing cabinets, become public timelines, and disputes cool when facts travel faster than rumor. None of this erases the moral gravity of return. It reframes belonging as participation. Who researches? Who writes? Who benefits? Rather than a pin on a map. The Grand Egyptian Museum, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, and regional hubs can anchor the compass. Partner institutions can extend the line. Between them, a new definition of home emerges. Not a fortress of possession, but a network of responsibility, where the story keeps moving and the meaning keeps deepening.
Back in the Grand Egyptian Museum's atrium, Ramses II holds the air steady. Glass catches pyramid edges, footsteps land like soft percussion. You can feel the argument the building makes, Egypt assembling its story in its own voice, alongside the quieter counterpoint of what isn't here. We've walked both paths. How masterpieces left under treaties, firmans, official decrees that functioned like export permits, and partage, the era's split the fines rule. How returns are pressed through diplomacy and lab reports. How Europe frames itself as a vault for world memory. How display is strategy, not decor. How trust is the most fragile object in any room. And how home might be a circuit, not just a pin on a map. And now, the promised twist from the introduction, closing the loop. The famous slab in London, so often treated as a singular key, was never meant to be singular. That royal decree stood in multiple temples, cloned in stone across Egypt. One substantial copy survives in Egypt today, the Nubira stele, a local twin that preserves much of the same hieroglyphic text. So while one stone became a global emblem abroad, its words never entirely left home, which is the museum's final lesson. Presence and absence aren't opposites, they're lenses. A nation can speak through what it gathers and also through what it still seeks. The Grand Egyptian Museum holds both truths at once. A hall of returns and a map of echoes, reminding us that heritage isn't only the survival of objects, it is the custody of meaning, the power to place things in context, and the right to tell the story in the landscape that gave it breath. If this reframed how you see where artifacts belong, tell me which absence hit you hardest, or which modern, universal museum debate you've seen in your own city. Drop a comment, share this with a friend who loves history with teeth, and subscribe to Armchair Archaeology for more deep dives into the past that still has a pulse. Tap the bell so you don't miss the next expedition. Keep the momentum going. Hop to one of our previous videos for the decoding story, or tour the Ancient Middle East playlist for context across empires, both on screen and linked below. Until next time, keep questioning, stay curious, and remember, history belongs to context, and context is a place, a people, and a promise.